just transitioning over now to basketball, for example. Look at the men's squad where, you come in thinking, all right, they should have these games in hand. They should stomp on over them. And as you said earlier, Matt, it ends up with a split against the Hartford team leveling down in a couple months.
Yeah, and Hartford, I mean, I've said things that this program, this is a perfect example of playing for pride, because the Hartford men's basketball team has nothing to play for. They do get in the tournament, and theoretically they do have a shot at an automatic qualifier.
They have more than what Stony Brook got right now.
But is a program with no future. I mean, the Hartford, their plans don't include these guys. They're basically cycling out the scholarship players and relegating themselves to D3. So this squad, it's like the last hurrah. And they outplayed the Seawolves in the second half, outscoring them by 10 points, 74-70 the final. And the funny thing about it is that even though Hartford, if you figure on the free throw line that they'd be able to convert, they had all kinds of trouble. This was a game that was in Stony Brook's hands. They had a shot at winning it and should have won it. But Hartford came up with the points they needed.
Yeah, I'm going to say with this one, it's such a weird schedule to play Hartford back to back, right? So it's COVID.
It's more like NHL actually.
Yeah, it's so weird that we're used to talking about the hockey team in these scenarios, right, where they have to play these back to back.
Well, they do. Yeah, they did. They on Friday and Saturday, or Saturday and Sunday, they would do that. That was routine for them. But in some cases, like say with Drexel, their last opponent in the regular season. By the way, they did win the division tournament.
We'll talk about that.
We will talk about that. But the important thing here is that you're conditioned to it because you're going to play it back-to-back and you have the rest of the week off. In the NHL, you're conditioned to it because oftentimes you'll have a home-and-home with a team in your division like a Philadelphia or the Rangers or Rangers Islanders or Rangers Devils, and you're used to it. You know it's going to happen. But, yeah, in basketball, no.
And I think for me at least, just based off of Saturday's game, I think you start losing Sunday's game on Saturday when you allow Hartford to get back into the game.
Also true.
You give them life, and then at the end of the game, you let them feel like they had an opportunity to win, and then when you go in and play the next day, it doesn't seem as difficult. It doesn't seem as an insurmountable thing to have it happen. And you're playing home if you're Hartford, right? So you're home on Saturday for Stony Brook. Hartford's home on Sunday today. So when you look at that, it's like, well, now we get to play at home, and we should have beat them yesterday. And it's right there because it's right in the taste is in your mouth. Mm-hmm. Right? It hasn't left you. It's not 3 weeks later. It's not 2 weeks later. It's not a month later. It's 24 hours later, less than 24 hours later, you're playing them again.
Yeah, this is a game. This is a team too. Yesterday, when the game Stony Brook won 88-82, they held Hartford to just 7% shooting from 3-point range in that first half, which was a huge difference maker in the Seawolves leading wire to wire, scoring 88 points, getting the win. Today, they allowed Hartford to come back, and the Hawks obliged shooting 60% overall and 43% from three in the second half alone. And I understand, this game was a battle of free throws, but you're absolutely right. Where, again, this is another game as Stony Brook allows its opponent to get back in and off a sluggish second half performance. And it's going to suck to hear this, but this team, it needs a system change and badly, because this isn't the first time or the second time or even the fifth time this season we've said, Stony Brook had a good first half, but second half. This has been a season-long issue and is a huge problem for this team and has really limited them in terms of success they were able to find this season. Team that they're 16-12 right now, but they could have done even better if they managed to not blow so many second half opportunities.
Yeah, and I was looking at the, watching the games, and then kind of you hit the box score afterwards. Because, when you're watching a game and then you look at the box score, it's like, wow, okay, maybe this guy did a little better than I thought, or this I put this guy on too much of a pedestal. In the one regard, I'm liking, Green and Roberts kind of like become the dominant players on the team, and I like that for next year's purposes as well too, because they're still, they're going to be returners next year.
Hopefully,
But then I
for
know.
Stony Brook's sake.
Yes, but then in the other direction, I start to say to myself, well, or have we become a little bit too one-dimensional? Like when you look at the men's team, the men's lacrosse team, when you look at the women's lacrosse team, you're looking at multi-scoring teams. You got multiple players who are scoring in different ways, and right now, I don't necessarily see that. With the men's basketball team, it seems like, okay, these guys are racking up some points, but we're not getting the production in the win column that you want to see. So who else needs to step up and play? I will say that it was nice to see Kane Roberts come in and put 10 points in. And then that's the kind of thing that you need. Like, who else is going to step up and start to produce?
Yeah, and that's the other issue too for this Stony Brook team, because more guys now are out for the rest of the season. Big loss in Jaleel Jenkins. He's out for the rest of the season due to an oral surgery. He would be allowed to come back for the final game, but Coach Roberts and himself decided against it. Juan Felix Rodriguez also taking a leave of absence. So that's two big scorers and two players you've relied on, at least in the starting roles, that aren't returning for the rest of the season. And, it's just another group of guys who are out and Stony Brook can't turn to. And besides the system problem, it goes to show that this team is really struggling with the culture and its identity when, again, you got so many guys just this season alone, Olani, Rodriguez, Jenkins, who haven't been able to play the full season, on top of guys in the past, key scorers, key players like Akwazi Ebola, like Miles Latimer, Mikhail Fermin, Olani as well, who have transferred out. This team has really struggled finding an identity that was so prevalent during the Jamil Warding era.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it doesn't seem when it's one thing, when it's one player, okay, it's not that big of a deal. But when you start having multiple players that having issues and things are going on, it becomes a little insurmountable. Then you start to, the season starts to get long.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the feeling is right now for the men, is that the season has gotten long. And, when you have a long season, it's almost like sometimes you can't wait for it to come to an end. And that's the feeling we get for the men right now.
Well, it's happening. The end is near.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I do, Ken, I do think you're right on that one. Like, what's the philosophical change? What's the player change? What's the way we go about our business change that's going to elevate the team next year? I think that's what you're looking at. And who do you have this year?
They only have 2-3 games left.
No, but I mean, who do you have this year as a player wise that you feel like you can lean on for next year? That's going to be really the basis of the foundation of your team.
Agree. Yeah, that's definitely, I think, what this team's been missing, just because with so much roster turnover the past few seasons. I understand this part of it is definitely outside circumstances. During COVID, there was obviously mass exodus, in terms of essentially every starter from that 2019-2020 team bouncing. But, we're going on, 3 or 4 years now where, all the guys on the roster can't even finish the season. And that's not a problem we've seen for a lot of other programs, especially on the women's side, where they've had plenty of success. And even, folks who are riding the bench are enjoying it, learning, getting valuable experience. So there's definitely, as you said, a foundation there that we're not seeing established on this men's squad that I really hope, for the program's sake, they're able to figure out to get it. Whether that means recruiting younger, getting more freshmen, relying more on, incoming freshmen as opposed to the transfers who we've seen have excelled and really stepped up as the leaders of the squad, or, whether that means changes in terms of, roles from the managerial point. This team really needs to find an identity.
Coach Gallardi said it when we spoke to him, when you guys interviewed him, I think a couple weeks ago. He said, you had brought up the fact that they had brought players in on the portal. And he goes, listen, it's nice to bring guys in on the portal. But you need two things. You need those players that are coming in on the portal to have an impact on your team, talent-wise. Okay, that's an easy one. You should be able to identify that. The second one, which is just as important, is what impact are they going to have on the culture of your team? And I go back to Chris Peterson. He was the University of Washington football coach. He used to call him OKGs. Is he our kind of a guy? Because you need to fill your roster with our kind of guys, because they're the ones that are going to be, they're the ones that get down and get the charge, right? They're the ones that get on the floor from loose ball, right? We need our kind of guys. And I think this is kind of what we're saying right now. We need to start getting some foundational players that we can lean onto and say, okay, this is going to be their team, and we're going to work this thing, and we're going to make it go from here. And I do think they have the talent. I do think they have some of those players. It was just so disjointed this year. Get back to that our kind of guys mentality, and guys that want to play for Stony Brook and do it the whole way through.
Yeah, and I understand, as you said, especially now, it's essentially a lost season because it's not looking like this team is really going to be playing in any sort of postseason. But just transitioning to the women's side, you see them, and it could be considered a lost season if they don't make any other tournaments outside of the conference one. If they're not reinstated in the next week or so, but they're still playing hard and dominating. And they're a team where you have a new head coach, you have a mix of veterans as well as several new pieces, some transfers, some freshmen, but they're still thriving and finding a lot of success. They've won 3 straight games, especially yesterday, winning 95-69 against Hartford, as well as that's Wednesday game 66-56.
I do want to jump in here right now. When you talk about having a new coach, I had the opportunity of interviewing Coach Langford before one of the games a couple weeks ago. And I tell you what, there was no question in my mind why they hired her to be the head coach. It's absolutely sensational. She is an absolute leader. And I could see why the women would just gravitate towards her, and that they would play, she's going to take that. She took the in her mind, she's like, I'm taking handcuffs to all the players. We're going to play hard defensively. I'm going to let them go after it all offensively. And they seem to be having a blast. Everything is working right for them right now. But just based off of her personality, I could see why the practice is going to be hard. They're going to be intense, but it's going to be a positive atmosphere. And she is going to make that whole team go. I have to say, I was really impressed with her when I got an opportunity to speak with her. So, just with that. And as far as the week is concerned, they just went after it this week. And, it was great. Everybody played in every game. Mm-hmm. So you have that kind of a week where not only are you winning games, you're doing it in kind of decisive fashion. Yeah, even if the score looks closer than what it is, the game really isn't that close, and everybody's getting into the games.
Yeah, and that would be both UMBC games, and really I thought it was a tremendous performance from the forwards this week, Matt. I mean, just Leah Mori-Wool really lit it up. She had 23 points on Monday and Wednesday as well. India Pagan played tremendously early in both games, especially her return back home to Connecticut. She had a great game against the Hawks. They're just the forwards, I think, getting it done in scoring and off the glass.
This is kind of the thing that, when you're looking at this, you see a team that's tuning up for a tournament, and the tournament, at least as far as we know now, isn't going to happen. It's like they're starting to gel at the right time, and their season's going to be cut off. And it just rips your heart out. I mean, they're doing their best, and the coaches are doing their best to basically put themselves in a bubble. Okay? Don't think about the tournament, think about the next game. Well, there are only 3 games left in the schedule, then what? I mean, it's almost like what happened 2 years ago with right. COVID, when the season got cut short, where you were ready to go, ready to make another run, and bang.
Now, Matt, I think the question is, and you're going to know this, I think, better than Ken and I. So, they have the 2 games left. They got UMass Lowell and they have Albany.
Right.
I think you're not as concerned. I think Albany, you're a little more concerned with. They're playing better basketball as well, too.
Well, yeah, the Seawolves have had no chance for relief here because in the America East standings, Albany is breathing down their necks. I mean, just looking at today's standings right now, as it opens up, on Wolfie Net. Okay. The women are 14-2. Maine is right behind with 12-3, and Albany's 12-4. Only 2 games behind. So this game means a lot to Albany.
Yeah, and I think if you're in now, you put yourself in Albany's shoes as well too. I think one of the things that can get them moving a little bit is the fact that we're not going to have to play Stony Brook. Right, they're not going to be in the Americas. Now it's up for grabs. Anybody can win this.
Well,
right, and why
as
not
the way things are going now, let's say if the season ended today, obviously, with Stony Brook out, Maine would be the top seed and Albany would be right behind them, and then Vermont. So, yes, play Stony Brook one more time, but the fact does remain, you must still beat Stony Brook because even though you may not have to worry about them in the tournament, you still need to beat them for the seeding. And it's quite possible on the last day of the season, Maine and Albany could be tied.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. But if the women win the regular season conference title, do they go to the WNIT?
The WNIT, that's a good question. Because usually you win the regular season title and don't win the tournament, you're guaranteed a WNIT bid. But if you're disqualified from the tournament, do you even place at all? That's an NCAA. See, the thing about it is the NIT, the I in NIT means invitational. And when it was originally conceived a year before the NCAA tournament was, that's what it was. And because in the NCAA tournament, all the way up until the 1980s, you had to win your conference tournament to even get in, which meant a lot of good teams ended up in the NIT. And in some cases, well, there was one time where everybody knows 1950 CCNY, where you could play in both, and CCNY was the only team to win both in the same year. And they're true national champion. But until the 60s, the NIT was actually the bigger deal. You could actually pick, if you had to pick between one or the other, the NIT had better competition.
Right, so you're picking that one to play in.
Yeah, the NCAA title didn't matter as much. St. John's got into the NCAA tournament game in 1952, I believe, lost to Kansas. But nobody really thought much about it because they all these NIT bids and NIT championships.
Right. Now, but if you went, I mean, they could go 25-3, right? If they win their next 2 games and then not play in the WNIT, that would be a tragedy.
Yeah, and this is such a unique case too because just looking it up, trying to find something similar in NIT and WNIT, I've never really found any scenario like that where you're the best team in the conference, but because you're ineligible for it, you're able to play or not play in the WNIT. I know it's independent from the NCAA tournament itself,
but it's run by the NCAA now. It used to be completely independent. It was a separate organization.
That is true, but again, it's independent at least from the America East, which you could think plays in Stony Brook favor, where because they had the best record and they didn't even get a shot, they could receive an at-large bid potentially.
Now, the NIT, that's where it gets a little bit confusing with the recently. Well, that's relatively recent. Last few years, the NCAA took over the NIT. Well, the NIT, the coaches were the ones who really wanted to keep it going because, especially as the NCAA tournament expanded from 16 to 32 to 48 to 64 to the play-ins, 68, I believe it is now. The winner of the NIT is number 69 in the country. The best team, the best team that didn't make the NCAA. Really not true, because half the teams in the NCAA are not as good as the teams in the NIT because they're from lesser conferences, mid-major conferences. So the reality is that the NIT had been kind of like a tune-up for teams that were on the upswing. Like Jim Calhoun won an NIT before the Yukon Huskies won the Big East tournament and then got to the Elite Eight in 1990. I believe they won the NIT in 88 or 89, 88, because I think St. John's won in 89. Same thing, though, because St. John's got to the Elite Eight in 91. So it's a stepping stone for a young team.
And what it provides you, I think, an opportunity to do as a team is it gets you more weeks of practices and more competitions.
Exactly.
Right?
And
so
also,
that's the stepping stone.
You're used to tournament pressure. It trains you for the big time, the big dance when you finally get back there. But a lot of big teams, a lot of power conference teams ended up in the NIT when it was invitation only, and used it to get back in there. It's kind of like playing in the second division or the championship division of English soccer and getting relegated and working your way back up.
Right. Yeah. And again, we're just looking at this independently too. So taking out any Stony Brook bias, to me, it's tough to rule not including a team where you look at their net ranking right now out of all the NCAA, and they're currently amongst the best 105 teams. And, you're looking at 2 postseasons that total 128 teams. And this is a team also receiving votes in the USA Today polls. It's going on 2 weeks, probably going to go on 3 weeks now. And it's not like they're just receiving one. They're up to 4 coaches' votes in the USA Today polls. So, it's a big deal that, they're getting this recognition even with this ineligibility, because it's not like you're seeing another team like Maine or Vermont receive the same sort of attention, or NJIT, for them to be the only ones, even with everything going on, it's tough for me not to see them get included in the WNIT.
While it has improved in recent years, we know the first thing we noticed when Stony Brook went Division I in just women's basketball, you had your great teams. You had your UConns, you had your Tennessees, you had your Louisiana Techs, and you had the absolute cutting edge of women's basketball, and they were good teams and good to watch. Then you had a big drop-off. So you had your top 5 or 10 teams in the NCAA tournament, and everybody else in the tournament was not even close. Couldn't even play on the same floor.
Right.
Okay?
It's not like the men's side of March Madness.
It's
not close.
Definitely not. So if you bring Stony Brook in on at large and bump somebody else off, who are you bumping off? That's the big argument here. Are you bumping off a team that, even though they might play in a tougher conference, something you're going to bump off a team that's better in Stony Brook? But it's the same problem. This is the reason why Stony Brook, as I said many times over, right now the books were open. The opportunity for Seawolves to advance to a tougher conference was there, and they had to take it. But the article in Inside Lacrosse still is in the back of my head, saying that one of the reasons why you do this, even though you don't necessarily see a lot of material improvements in terms of at-large bids, is that they can't say you don't play anybody anymore. Mm-hmm. Particularly in lacrosse, in the CAA, you can't say you don't play anybody.
Yeah, but I do agree. You'd said this one time, and I agree with the idea that you can't say, especially when it comes to really all the programs as well. I think it's just a step up in competition.
Yes,
but you're only getting one. You're only getting one bid, though. And that becomes
that has been the biggest complaint I have had about the CAA since we went to the America East. Okay, and Hofstra barely saw the light of day until relatively recently. Okay, they could not get a whiff of the NCAA tournament out of the CAA, where they owned the America East.
And I think that is going to be difficult for Stony Brook, because I think when you jump into the America East, you're going to have some success, because success in your conference means, obviously wins. It's for your record as well, too, but it means NCAA appearances. And the quicker you can make NCAA appearances, the better off you're going to be in recruiting players.
Right. Agreed. And just wrapping this up, we're transition again. This week's going to be, obviously, it's their last week. They're going to be playing, with their hearts. This one coming up as well is going to be senior night for the seniors. Obviously, going to be at least the last regular season home game for players like India Pagan, Kinsey Boucher. So, you're going to see their emotions worn on their sleeves. And going up against a team like UMass Lowell, this means an easy weekend, especially Wednesday, to prove that you belong, in that tournament by, once again, just mopping the floor, with the opposition. They scored 95 against Hartford. I feel like they could put up similar numbers against a UMass Lowell team. It was a close game the first time for sure, but still, definitely with just how emotional, how much we believe is at stake this week. It's definitely one where they're on such a roll right now. They definitely, I think, could keep it up, really dominate against them, and then have a statement win against Albany to close the regular season.
Yeah, and I think with the when you have like a senior game and you're coming down to this point in time, and this goes back to we've spoken about before, you start to get to the humanity of sports as well too. It's not just this is the last time I'm going to be playing a game, which certainly plays a factor in the last game. This is the last time you're playing. This is the last time you're playing college sports. That certainly has it. But it also becomes, now you're transitioning in your life as well too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's not just, I'm no longer able to play. It's like, well, now I have to go on to the career of my choosing. Right. Or try to get into a career that I'm choosing. So that adds to it as well too. I don't know. I think sometimes we forget that, right? It's not just about it's your last game and how sad it is you're not going to be able to play basketball anymore. It's almost like this is the end of a stage in your life, mm-hmm. and you're now moving on to the next stage. Similar to like when you graduated high school. You graduated high school, and it's like, oh, all right, things are changing. Right. I think that's part of the same feeling with it as well too.
And just looking who's gonna be honored. It's gonna be Mackenzie Boucher, India Pagan, but as well Leo Mori-Wool. So those are three bigs that obviously aren't gonna be part of the team next year, but three bigs who have been a huge reason why this team has found a lot of success. Obviously crushing the boards, but also scoring. Just looking at what Wool and Pagan produced this week, averaging over 10 points per contest. This is going to be a game for them where I think they're really going to go off and almost compete against each other in terms of who has the better game, last time out from your home fans.